Alrighty folks, welcome back to yet another episode of Close to Broke. Today we find ourselves at the Bicycle Casino. Gonna be hopping into their 5-10 game as per usual. Don't need to go out of the park here. They have better games, but they're private games. So, let's start like a petition to get me in these private games. I'm always a good time. If you guys have ever played with me before, you guys know I'm a lot of action and good fun. You guys can obviously see it from the videos. Anyways, let's hop into today's session. Don't need to blabber on too much longer. Let's have some fun and finally win at a casino I just can never find a win at. Anyways, we're following up with a 3K max buy-in in the 5-10-20 game here at the bike. Gonna be doing my very best to make as much money as possible. And we're starting off with an absolutely fun one here off the rip. Early position decides to raise to $60. There is a straddle on, and there will be for pretty much every single hand in today's session. Pulls over to the small blind, who decides to make the call. We look down at 7-6 of spades here from the big blind. After a little bit of thinking, this is a great spot to 3-bet here. I do have position on one of the players, and the small blind pretty much is dead money in this instance, so I decide to make it $260. And the reason I'm doing this is obviously because I'm going to be doing this with my strong hands. It's important to have these kind of suited connector hands as well in there. The most common bluffs in this range are going to be like broadways as well as wheel aces. But I think having these suited 7-6 or suited 1-gappers are really powerful in your 3-betting range. It will be harder for you to be played against by your opponent. Anyways, early position decides to make the call. The small blind folds. Looks like we're going heads up out of position to a flop that comes Jack 7-4 rainbow. This is a board texture that is going to be favorable for my range in many aspects, considering it's fairly static. There's not a lot going on in this board texture, so there's no reason for me to really bet a massive sizing. Although I will add that my hand, my exact holding, would be very lucky and very important for me to be betting for equity denial. The last thing I want to do is check and allow my opponent here with king, queen, or ace highs to improve in some aspects without charging them for floating. So I end up down betting to $185. My opponent takes a brief pause before eventually making the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes better than anything I could have possibly asked for. A 7 of clubs. This is usually a card that doesn't, really change anything. Considering this is a 3-bet pot, ranges are going to be fairly narrow. And if that's the case, I think that my opponent's going to have a couple of floats with ace high or king high, but more than likely some form of a single pair that now turns into 2 pair, obviously. So if he has a jack or something of the sort, I think that he'd be calling almost any bet sizing within relation to the pot. My goal at this point is to build the size of the pot and give us a pretty reasonable jam on the river. I'm almost scared of no river cards besides specifically a jack maybe at this point. And like I said, I'm trying to get value from hands specifically like 9s, 10s, and any pair of jacks. I decide to bet $575. Obviously, I'd of course be betting this sizing as a bluff. It is very, very hard to find a bluff in this range, to be honest, considering how unbelievably static the board texture is. But here we are betting $575, to which my opponent almost instantly decides to make the fold. Unfortunate there, but happy to take down a nice, healthy pot. It wouldn't be a regular Close to Broke poker vlog without some crazy shenanigans occurring, and this hand is exactly that. I have put on the triple straddle for $80, looking to spice up the action in this game, as it's been fairly dull to this point. It folds all the way over to the big blind, who decides to raise to $265, playing around $1,400 or $1,500 effective, somewhere in that range. When it folds over to me, I look down at ace jack of clubs, and if you guys remember in a couple of vlogs ago in Texas, the weird thing happened where there was like 6 freaking straddles or something and I had pocket aces, and I just decided to jam because I had like 10 big blinds. This is the same case here. My opponent doesn't even have whatever, like 20 big blinds, so I'm gonna go ahead and jam. I have a suited Broadway, I have an ace and an $80 blind straddle raise or whatever the heck you want to call it. So I decided to jam for what is around, like I said, $1,500, which is his effective stack. He decides to make the call after a brief pause, and we're going out to a run out that is unbelievable. The flop comes ace, jack, 7, rainbow. I let him know immediately that I do have top 2 pair. I'm not into the whole slow rolling aspect here or kind of giving false hope or whatever the hell may be. The turn card comes an 8 and the river comes a 6. We end up scooping a monstrous pot here early in the session. Obviously, he probably had a better hand sometimes, but I really don't know. Maybe he had like a 10s or something. I'm not sure. He didn't show, and obviously I'm never going to force my opponent to show. Outstanding outcome for what was a pretty ridiculous spot. Let me know if you guys have ever had the luck like this. Have you guys ever thrown out the 3rd or 4th straddle and had a massive pot coming your way? I'm interested to hear, especially for my lovely friends down in Texas, because you guys know the straddles get pretty crazy out there. Remember earlier when I said that it's nice to have these suited little 1-gappers or connectors? What about suited, like a lot of gappers? 10-7 of spades here in a pretty interesting spot. Early position decides to limp. I decide to isolate to $115 from middle position. The button decides to make the call. Early position decides to make the call. And we're going off to a flop, looking for some help or at least a range advantage. The flop comes ace, 8, 3 with 2 diamonds and 1 spade. So we do flop a couple of backdoor options. And obviously the ace is better for my range than anyone else's. I decide to c-bet here for $185, and thankfully everyone decides to fold. This just goes to show you that you shouldn't be afraid to use well-timed aggression to really capitalize on some plus EV spots. Middle position, making these moves are pretty profitable. Obviously the button's probably the most profitable, but happy to take it down nonetheless. Okay, obviously to this point we've been running really well. Grabbing a quick drink of Starbucks before we finish out the session. Yeah, we're obviously running really well, playing really well. It's easy to say you're playing well when you're running well. You know, with that ace jack hand, we're probably up at least 2,000 right now, 2 or 3,000. So let's keep the energy going in the right direction. Let's see if I can build some more big pots. Appreciate you guys as always. I'll see you guys on the next 10. Let's get into it, man. This game is actually pretty good. I'm making it good though. I'm triple straddling, so you know, we're trying our best to make a boring bite game fun. These guys have been wonderful though, I can't lie. These next 2 hands come in rather quick succession, so let's hop right into the nonsense. There are 2 limps when it gets over to me in the big blind, and I look down at pocket kings. What a sight to see. Remember earlier in a similar situation, I guess, we decided to isolate, or I guess 3-bet at that point with a bad hand. Here we are with a nutted hand. I decide to make it $160. Only the button decides to make the call, which is one of the players that I'm unfortunately out of position to. But anyways, we're going to a flop that comes pretty reasonable as it comes ace, 3 deuce with 2 diamonds. We are holding ourselves a beautiful diamond, which allows us to either check or bet really small in these board textures. And I actually decided to do something interesting by deciding to check it myself as well. Playing this a little funky for sure. The button decides to check it through, and we're going off to a turn card that comes 3 of clubs. At this point, it's time to build the size of the pot in some aspects. So I decide to bet a little bit on the larger side. Again, considering I'd be probably doing this with a bunch of random bluffs. If I had a hand like a 9 high or something like that I now turn some equity, I'd be betting pretty large, and I've been doing that to this point on most turn cards. So I decide to make it $325. And my opponent pretty quickly decides to make the fold. He was very confused about my sizing though, and that I think is really important. If I'm betting and confusing my opponents, they're eventually going to get super curious. He was there, but his hand was far too weak to make the call. So we're happy to take that one down. Quickly speeding up the next shuffle from deckmate 2 or whatever the heck this thing is called. We're in a pretty ridiculous spot once again. We look down at pocket frickin' queens. If it wasn't good enough that we had kings last time, we've been now compensated with the old pocket queens, the pocket ladies. Shout out to Bill Burr. I decide to raise to $80 here from the small blind, to which my opponent, who's been very actively 3-betting here from the big blind, decides to 3-bet me to $290. I almost snap, re-raise him to $650, to which he decides to go into the tank for quite some time before eventually jamming all in for $3,000, the old 5-bet 300 big blind jam. Look, blind versus blind in a 7-handed game, I'm never folding ever. I snap call, as you guys can see from these stupid square all-in pucks that you have to use at the bike for some reason. We decide to run it out one time, and one time seems fine to me. The flop comes 7-6-4. I don't remember if I have a diamond or not. Obviously, you guys can see it on your screen. The turn comes the ace of hearts, and I'm in utter disgust, especially when he tells me that he has ace queen. But the river, if we can catch a diamond, will bail us out in a majestical $6,000 pot. Make sure to click the like button. 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna give you one last chance. Make sure to click the like button. The river comes a freaking 10 of diamonds. Oh my goodness. You could have not written a better story if this was the Disney Channel. Oh my goodness. Massive pot, the suck out, and then the re-suck out. That was amazing. It's easy in the poker world and the poker streets when you're just running good, obviously, and people are just willing to bluff and 5-bet jam with ace queen in spots that, you know, I would definitely do, but it feels like some people forget that you can have a bluffing range. Anyways, in this next hand, we're playing blind versus blind. I'm in the straddle, and the big blind decides to raise to $120. We look down at this beautiful pocket nines. Can't be folding a pair. I don't mind 3-betting sometimes, but I'm in position. I don't mind, you know, keeping this relatively reasonable. The only thing that's a little obnoxious is that my opponent is sitting on what feels like $1,500 from what I can see. So he's only playing around technically 70 big blinds effective. We're going off to a flop that comes an absolute banger once again. Jack 9-4. I decide to c-bet for $55, really small, trying to entice my opponent to do something ridiculous after he checks to me. He's not catching the bait. He decides to immediately fold, but we take down a pretty reasonable pot. Just another win for us. I feel like I've won every single hand of this session, and it's only realistic that we finally, you know, find a little bit of adversity or maybe another win. I don't want to spoil it. We look down at King 10 of diamonds and we raise to $60. The button decides to make the call. The one person that we don't have position in this hand. And the straddle makes a call as well. And we're going off to a flop that comes ace 10 for all 3 clubs. Starts off with a straddle who checks, continuing to plain flow. The option is now over to me. I don't have any cards here that really mix too well. Obviously, this is going to be better for my range, considering I will have all the aces here. I can definitely have suited Broadway here as well. But in reality, I think I'd rather take my hand to showdown. I already have a pair of 10s. No reason to blow the size of the pot. So I decide to make the check. The turn comes a queen of spades. The opponent decides to check again. And here is the massive red flag alert. Like, you know, cue the ridiculous sirens and stuff. Why are we leading out here for $80? I have no idea. I think at the time I'm saying like equity denial, but this is just a horrible turn card to bet on. Hands like king queen, king jack, queen 10, queen jack, ace queen, ace jack. All of these hands are better and they're never folding to 1 bet. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm never getting called by worse, ever, literally ever. And when the river comes a king, I finally do something good in this hand by leading out for $25 as a blocker bet. My opponent pretty quickly decides to make the call, to which he shows us king queen for a better 2 pair. The hand played itself, I guess. If I'm going to play it poorly, I've got to really own up to it. And the simple fact is that turn bet was unbelievably horrible. Top 10 worst turn bets of my life, I think, honestly. At least the river bet, you know, blocker bet was reasonable. I didn't allow him to go for any larger sizing. And, you know, I can't kill myself for at least the river play in this hand. Honestly, that last hand was so poorly played, I'm kind of throwing off my mojo for the entire session's unbelievable run. Like, I have to be fair with myself, and I think I play well. I'm going to give myself the benefit of the doubt. But when I do something that horrific, I've got to call myself out. And look, that was just horrible. Like, there's just no way around it. Really bad poker. It sucks when you play really well, lights out, and you make a mistake like that. That could be what causes you to swing from a massive winner to a massive loser. Luckily, it was a small pot against a fairly passive player. That could have been really bad, you know, otherwise. Anyways, we look down at ace king of spades here from the under the gun position, and we decide to raise it up to $60. My opponent here from the straddle position is the only player left to act when it folds all the way over to him. And he decides it's about time to do something very interesting, and that is play back at me. He decides to 3-bet me for the first time in today's session at $240. When it gets back over to me, I am in position, so I'm never going to be folding, and just calling seems okay, I guess, but again, he's playing around $1,500 effective. I don't need to be doing anything too cute. I'd rather bet here and get a pretty even SPR of 1-to-1. So I think $580 is a reasonable bet. Looking back in hindsight, I don't love my sizing. I think I can actually get away with going a little smaller, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2.5x. So I think, somewhere around 510, 520 seems a little better. Anyways, after a bit of pause, my opponent decides to just make the flat call, leaving himself with about $1,000 behind. And again, perfect SPR of 1-to-1. The flop couldn't have come any better, as it comes king 3 deuce with 2 clubs and a diamond. The action starts off with me here, and I decide to lead out with a bet of $290. Don't need to be going massive here. I'm trying to go right around 30% of the pot, or even less. I have such a hammerlock on this hand. I'm not really worried about anything. And we don't want queens or jacks to get away. And obviously when I am bluffing here with wheel aces or ace queen, I don't want to be going too massive then as well, as there's not really a great need to. After a brief moment of pause, my opponent eventually decides on making the fold. So that'll do it for today's session. That is going to wrap it up. A pretty eventful one, to say the least. It was an outstanding day of poker and bagging one of the largest wins of my poker career, and definitely by far and away the biggest win of 2022 for Close to Broke. Thank you guys for watching. Let's throw it to the outro. Today was awesome. Alright, so how many of you guys have your jaws dropped at this point? Because today's session was kind of like in the bruise almost. Like it was kind of in the works. I feel like maybe I'm wrong. It's easy to like pretend like things don't go in your way, but it feels like I've been playing sessions and bluffing a lot because I just haven't been making hands, and today I just bluffed in like 1 or 2 spots maybe, and I just got slammed by the deck. I mean, I almost felt guilty, honestly. I mean, one thing I will say is obviously I don't come to the Bragg property too much. It is where I came during the pandemic though. They ended up making it like some kind of VIP situation. Sorry about that, the car just pulled up, but I just want to thank you guys as always for constantly supporting the videos and being super supportive in an industry that's usually like a lone wolf game. Anyways, it's easy to have all this stupid clarity when you run well. Let's get to the numbers. We were into today's game for 3K and out for 84.47 if I'm not mistaken. Gonna check my app real quick, for a grand total of 54.47. So almost a $5,500 win, which will be my largest win ever. And it's ridiculous that it happened in a 5, 10, 20 game, but it's gonna happen. These swings are gonna be crazy because the cap here is 3K, which to be quite honest, I'm not too comfortable with. Not at a 5, 10 game. I think 3K is just way too much, and I haven't talked about that quite a bit, but that's gonna do it for today's session. I appreciate you guys always for coming through. Stay happy, stay healthy, and more importantly, run good at the tables. Deuces, y'all. Thank you so much for the support.